In 2002, the first infestation of the non-native emerald ash borer was found in Michigan. 7 years later, the first infestation of EAB was found in Minnesota. The 2009 find was the start of the campaign in North Dakota to raise awareness to EAB. It has taken another 14 years for EAB to reach Moorhead, Minnesota. The slow northwesterly distribution has taught us where to look for EAB and what are some indicators of its presence. This presentation is about where to look for new EAB infestations. The first thing to look for EAB is correctly identifying ash trees. There are many trees in the prairie landscape that will have a series of ailments, so we need to start by making sure that the tree observed is an ash. We'll focus on identification during the leaf-off period, since woodpecker damage will be the big indicator for emerald ash borer presence. When the leaves are on, it is very difficult to see inside the tree crown. One of the best indicators of ash is opposite branching, when the buds form across from one another. This type of branching is only found on ash and maple in the North Dakota landscape and is rarely seen on any other trees. The second important identifier is the bark, which generally has flat-topped ridges and a diamond-shaped furrowing. When you see opposite branching and these two bark characteristics, there's a good chance it's ash. During the leaf-on season, the opposite branching structure also appears in the compound leaves, where 5 or more leaflets make up an individual leaf. Emerald ash borer adults start to emerge from the bark to feed on the leaves at about 450 growing degree days, which in Fargo is approximately the second week of June. The adult emergence will continue through 1,000 growing degree days, or the beginning of July. After 2 to 3 weeks of feeding on ash leaves, the adult females will lay eggs on the bark that take another 2 to 3 weeks to hatch. The hatched larvae then bore through the outer bark into the conductive tissues just beneath. Beetle larvae of many other tree-infesting species often cause enough damage as larvae bore under the bark to show visible browning leaf symptoms. EAB larvae, on the other hand, form relatively narrow serpentine galleries that usually don't cause enough damage to the conductive tissues to cause visible foliage discoloration. What this means is that it takes many more EAB to start causing declines in leaf production, which most commonly appear the following growing season. It is uncommon for boring EAB to cause current year leaves to die. This is why EAB is difficult to detect before EAB numbers are large enough to cause significant thinning of an ash crown. The progressing damage associated with increasing numbers of emerald ash borer causes a crown to thin from one year to the next. With EAB continuing to reproduce, a greater number of larvae are boring into the conductive tissues, slowing the rate of water and nutrient transport between the roots and the leaves. The tree needs to continue to grow enough leaves to support its current relationship of conductive tissues in the trunk to the amount of leaf area on the tree. Maintaining this relationship maximizes the rate of photosynthesis that is producing energy for growth. As thinning decreases the number of leaves that are emerging in the crown, the tree responds by producing epicormic branches. These adventitious branches tend to sprout on the trunk below the crown and will produce leaves that compensate for those lost from above. Epicormic branching occurs during the later stages of emerald ash borer infestations, as the tree's crown has continued to thin due to increasing boring larvae numbers. Advanced populations of emerald ash borer create visible signs of thinning crowns and epicormic branching that become obvious once leaves are completely emerged early in the growing season. If you are seeing decline in an ash tree that does not have epicormic sprouts on the trunk, there's a good chance the damage is more likely occurring slowly and is being caused by some of the endemic beetles that also use ash trees as hosts. This guild of native species can be found commonly where ash trees are growing, which continues to complicate the search for emerald ash borer in the North Dakota landscape. Generally, if noticeable thinning and epicormic branching are being observed, the infestation in the area is likely relatively advanced, and the same signs would be seen in multiple trees. So this presentation is focused on locating emerald ash borer infested trees before the infestation is advanced enough in numbers that it is spilling over into many neighboring trees. The last 20 years have taught us that the best indicator of the presence of emerald ash borer is bark foraging bird activity. Watching, listening, and looking for woodpeckers and their damage has become the best way to find new infestations. If you're not bird-brained enough to be aware of woodpecker calls and pecking, or noticing them flying around, you can still look for pecking damage. Woodpeckers foraging on ash for emerald ash borer can be observed in the 3 to 6 inch diameter upper crown branches of ash trees. Foraging will start with small holes in the bark that evolve into larger digging once larvae are detected. The process of the bark being removed by woodpeckers is often referred to as blonding, but early signs are smaller groups of shallow holes in these upper crown branches. Emerald ash borer adults won't just lay their eggs on any part of an ash tree until their numbers are high enough that they spread throughout the tree. With new infestations, adult females tend to lay eggs on the smaller upper crown branches where the textured bark is first starting to develop. This transition from smooth to textured bark allows both cover for the eggs and an overall bark thickness that is minimal, allowing for less boring to reach the conductive tissues underneath. In the northern climates, EAB larvae survival is significantly influenced by cold winter temperatures. This influences the orientation of successful larval boring and consequently woodpecker damage. Woodpecker damage can be found most frequently on the portion of the branch that is oriented to the south or southwest, where the sun warms the tree. Looking for woodpecker damage on the 3 to 6 inch diameter limbs with newly textured bark and a south or southwest orientation is the most efficient place to look to find new EAB infestations. It is not uncommon to come across a completely blonded ash tree in a natural forest setting. This damage is unlikely to be EAB when there is only one visibly damaged tree. If EAB was present, they would have been more likely to infest several trees at one time, causing similar levels of damage and decline in all of those trees. If a tree was completely blonded because of EAB presence, there would be far more obvious damage spread throughout the area to neighboring trees. The distinctive signs of emerald ash borer are D-shaped exit holes, where the adult beetle bores out of the bark. These holes are approximately 1/8 inch in the widest dimension, with the flat side of the D being the back or the winged side of the beetle. Another distinctive sign is the serpentine galleries made by larvae that become visible by removing loose bark or when loose bark falls off the tree. These two signs are what is looked for to identify EAB on an ash tree. It is also common to see bark splits from where galleries are made underneath, since the lost conductance causes the bark to separate from the tissues growing below. There is an opportunity to protect the highest value trees that are growing in a landscaped setting. Trees that are large and dominate a yard or grow in tight spaces among buildings can be treated if they are still in good health. Systemic insecticides can prevent EAB from successfully establishing in these high-value trees. Application of insecticides can only be accomplished through individual tree treatment. Protecting a large group of trees, whether in a natural forest or community, is very difficult and cost prohibitive. Systemic insecticide applications should only be applied to the most important and valuable trees. Tree removals and replacement should be applied to create a more sustainable circumstance when groups of trees are of concern. Ash of all ages and states of health are at risk to EAB, so creating diverse conditions is the best way to limit the loss. Management for dealing with emerald ash borer and any other tree insect and disease issue comes down to making sure that a diverse group of tree species are present. Removing and/or replacing some to make sure a variety are present will limit the loss of forest canopy from emerald ash borer or most other insects and disease issues. The focus on diversifying is not just species, but also planting trees or vegetation with different forms, broadening the function of species to include things like shrubs. Planting a variety of shrubs, trees, and other vegetation assures greater tolerance to a variety of possible disturbances that can cause our managed natural spaces to become rapidly reshaped. I want to leave you with a resource to help manage the presence of EAB. Anyone should be watching for ash trees to show signs of an emerald ash borer infestation. If ash trees are found that fit the signs and symptoms in this presentation, that information should be reported as a suspected tree. This can be done through the North Dakota Department of Agriculture's Survey 123 online form that is accessible through the NDDA website. Using the QR code here on this presentation, or by sending an email to reportapest@nd.gov. Each reported tree will be assessed for EAB based on its individual characteristics. Thank you very much for your time.